I mean, there would be so much to say, and Leonardo is such a huge and complex figure that scholars have dedicated their entire lives to finding out about Leonardo and exploring Leonardo's achievements, and it never ends. I mean, in that sense, he's inexhaustible. One of the most striking things about Leonardo, I think, is the combination of his interest in art and his interest in science, and the way people think of him now as an artist, perhaps primarily. But I don't think that Leonardo himself would have thought of himself as primarily an artist. I think he would have seen his art as part of his overall work in trying to understand the world. And therefore his scientific explorations were very, very significant for him as part of his achievement. And one of the things I think we're hoping the British Library exhibition will do will be to allow visitors to understand that aspect of his achievement much more deeply, and to understand how it underpins his art, how it feeds into the famous paintings like the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the Virgin of the Rocks. He says explicitly that he thought painters needed to understand what they were depicting, the human bodies, the natural phenomena, in scientific terms. They needed to understand the laws which underlay those things in order to depict them well. So for Leonardo, his art was an expression of the same endeavours which informed his scientific exploration. And then perhaps the other very significant thing about Leonardo is that, as I said earlier, he wasn't formally educated, so he was able to break out from traditional frameworks of thinking. He read books and he respected the knowledge that you found in books, but he wasn't confined or limited by them. He was very much able to think for himself, and that seems to me a very important element in his overall achievement, that he was a kind of free spirit, if you like, that he sort of breaks through barriers. Clearly he hasn't got the instruments, for example, in order to observe. For example, there are studies of the moon and the light on the moon, and Leonardo understands quite a lot about why the moon is lit, but he hasn't got a telescope because the telescope hadn't yet been invented, so he's not able to observe these things with scientific instruments. But he works out a great deal simply by using the observational methods that he was used to using anyway. So he's very significant, I think, in his period for breaking through as far as he could the barriers to scientific knowledge by basing everything on observation. I mean, he also realizes when he's wrong. He works through different theories, and when he realizes that a theory is wrong, he discards it, he moves on from that theory. And all that seems to me scientific behavior, a scientific approach, before what we think of as the scientific revolution of the 17th century with Galileo, with Newton, and so on. So that seems to me his importance in the 15th and the 16th century. His importance for us now, partly to understand that position of his, but also, I think, to see certain aspects of his work which are particularly relevant for us today. I can think of two that I'd like to single out. I mean, one, we've spoken a bit about water, and I spoke about his practical interest in water, in what we might want to call river management. And it's very striking, and I think it's particularly striking for us today, how Leonardo is concerned with minimal environmental intervention on managing rivers and managing water flow. And that seems to me his interest in containing or limiting environmental intervention, in some ways understanding nature so that you can work with nature in order to manage nature better. And that seems to me a message which has a lot of, a great deal of contemporary relevance for us today. And then the other thing is how brilliant Leonardo is at conveying information visually or graphically. There's a wonderful drawing of an underwater breathing device from one of the Arundel sheets. We don't know whether the device was ever built, whether it ever worked, but you understand everything about the construction, how Leonardo envisaged the construction of that device, simply by looking at the drawing, and the way that he blows up certain parts of the drawing so that you can see the inner construction of it in detail. And that emphasis on conveying information visually, that again seems to me something with a real contemporary relevance, something that we can immediately connect with in Leonardo's achievement today.